Hi, Aaron. Thank you for joining us today at Head Magazine.
Hi, Charlotte. Thanks for having me.
Tell us about the National Cannabis Industry Association.
Well, NCIA is the industry's trade association that represents small businesses in cannabis across the country. We started NCIA back in 2010, believe it or not. That was kind of a time before a lot of people were talking about the industry, but just having seen the opportunity to really build an industry when we were on the kind of the precipice of Colorado and Washington about to enact laws. We started NCIA to represent the business interests of at that time medical cannabis operations, and now, of course, we've expanded to adult use. And our members comprise not just retailers or cultivators, manufacturers, the plant touching businesses, but the myriad of ancillary products and services in the industry. Really, anything you can think of in the cannabis space. And we're proud to represent them in Washington D.C. with a full-time team of lobbyists.
Yeah, so what is your mission? What is the mission of the NCIA?
Yeah, the mission is to advance a responsible and sustainable and inclusive cannabis industry. And really, what that means on a day to day is that we have a lobbying team in DC that is educating lawmakers and regulators and policymakers on the issues affecting our industry. Some of the big issues for us are fixing the banking problem so that cannabis businesses have access to the financial system like any other, reforming 280E of the tax code, which is a provision that really cripples our industry when they're paying, effectively on their gross receipts, federal income taxes. And then, of course, descheduling cannabis, removing it from the list of controlled substances, and legalizing it coast to coast.
So, yeah, let me get back to that. I have some questions for you about the legalization situation. But what are the benefits of being a member of the NCIA?
Yeah, so first and foremost, the benefit is you have the assurance that you have a representative in the nation's halls of power. Every industry has associations working on their behalf. There are thousands and thousands of lobbyists in DC, and if not for our members, NCIA would not exist. And we are the only organization that represents small cannabis businesses. That's number one. Number two is we have a myriad of ROI benefits that provide direct ROI, such as access to events that are free for members, educational opportunities that help promote best practices for members, access to exclusive data, industry data and metrics through our website, through BDSA's platform, and a listing in our member directory so that members can find one another. It's a place where those in the industry go looking for products and services from the most forward-thinking. I like to think the most forward-thinking folks in the industry are those who are invested in the policy reforms that are going to make our industry viable long term.
Now, I know you have a lot of events. What are some of the events that you have coming up?
Well, we have a series of industry social events, which are kind of casual evening events that bring our members together to connect with one another, hear about what we're doing. We have a series of those coming up in cities like New York and Miami and Chicago and Seattle, Denver, and a few others in the coming months. But the event I'm really excited about is our 11th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days coming up May 16th through 18th in Washington, D.C. And this is an event like no other event in cannabis. It really, it's not even, it's more an experience than an event. It's an opportunity for our members to come out to the nation's capital for 2 days. We set up meetings with members of Congress and their staff. We keep them very busy for 2 days, going across the Capitol complex, meeting with various members of Congress, talking about the issues that affect them in their day-to-day lives. It's really impactful for, it's one thing for, our lobbyists are there talking on behalf of the industry and our members every day, but it's really, really powerful when they once in a while can actually hear from the people directly affected by federal policy. And that's what Lobby Days is about. It's also a great way for members to kind of come together and meet people from across the country that have similar concerns and interests, in a really unique experience where you're working together toward a common goal. Not just and we have some fun evening events happening during the the 2 days as well. But it's so much more than that.
Sounds wonderful. I can tell you that I attended the Los Angeles social, and it was a wonderful experience. It was like it had friendly, it had such a good vibe, and everybody there was completely interested in networking, and they were open and friendly, and there were people of all ages and all backgrounds, and it was just really one of the best events I've been to in a long, long time. Um, what what prompted you to start this organization in 2010? What
Yeah.
what was going on in Aaron's mind, that made you do, had you do that?
I'd been working in the cannabis reform space for marijuana policy project at that time for about 5 years for MPP and doing some other work before that. So I've been, working on this issue and just started seeing different issues emerge that, we were in the early days, it was just make it legal and don't put people behind bars anymore. And that was kind of how simple the message was before we got to a point where there was actually, regulations for how marijuana legalization looked in any state. But as time went on, we started, California had a number of medical cannabis collectives that were operating effectively like businesses in their state. Colorado had just, I think in 2009, had just implemented a law that allowed for-profit medical marijuana operations to develop in that state. And what we started seeing were there were just issues that the traditional advocacy groups weren't as interested in working on, like tax, the tax code and how it affects marijuana businesses, or access to the banking services and how that affects marijuana businesses. We're not as, the other organizations were doing great work then and continue to do great work now, but those were kind of niche issues that were more important to the business side of the, of the whole cannabis ecosystem. And that ecosystem was growing, that the business side was growing and growing really rapidly, and we were seeing that it was going to, very rapidly in the future. And there was really just a vacuum. There was nobody there to represent all these businesses on the national scale. And so we being me, our partner at the time, Steve Fox, who also helped as a co-founder of NCIA, decided to, kind of break off and do this organization. We brought probably 18 or 20 top industry people together to form the first board. And there's folks from all over the country, and just kind of grew from there.
I mean, look, so what's your background? Tell me a little bit about yourself, your history.
Yeah, so I've been working in cannabis reform pretty much my whole adult life. I got arrested for possession of cannabis when I was about 17 years old, so I wasn't even an adult yet. And that kind of shaped my thinking on the war on drugs and the role of government in our personal lives. And it was also it was a violent situation with the officer. So that led me to, in college, started looking into various political movements. Libertarianism, for one, was one thing back in my early optimistic days. And at that time, also Prop 215 was on the ballot in California since the late 90s. And the medical marijuana initiative had some exposure to that. And then, but he plugged into work from organizations like Normal, Marijuana Policy Project, first as a volunteer, and then ultimately ended up, working on this professionally as an organizer and a lobbyist in California, working on improving the medical marijuana law at that time, as well as kind of doing some initial push for legalization before starting NCIA.
Very cool. So, I see that you go also state by state, not just federally, but you go about the various states with cannabis entrepreneurs. What is your focus in the various states?
Well, so we're not doing any lobbying in the states. Like, we're lobbying in Washington, D.C.,
Mhm.
but we have committees that are made up of members from all across the country that help to promote best practices, uniform regulations in the states. We work with an organization called CANRA, which is the Cannabis Regulators Association. So they're like us, but they represent regulators.
Mhm.
We work with them to the extent that we can to advance uniformity in the laws, so that you don't have labels for the same product that look different in every single state, just to We've got it's a difficult enough economic climate industry to be in without having those sorts of issues. So, and then of course, we will advocate for, encourage states that have already moved to legalization to advocate for themselves on the federal level so that we can finally get federal legalization, which to me, a big part of that is going to mean interstate commerce and ensuring that, places like California and Oregon can become, national leaders and as exporters of cannabis, outdoor grown cannabis into states where, there's supply problems even now. So that's the long game there.
Well, the thing is, so I want to ask you about that. Are you concerned about federal legalization? In other words, it might stop the various, situation that's going on in the states, and are you concerned about the equivalent of like big pharma and big tobacco, taking over? Because the whole focus of the NCIA is the medium to small entrepreneurs. Is there a concern about the actual legalization as opposed to decriminalization?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I mean, it is a concern. If we don't do this right, this industry could evaporate and be co-opted by big pharma or maybe big alcohol. I'm under no illusion that under any circumstances alcohol and pharma will have a place here.
Oh, clearly, but I mean,
yeah,
the fear is that they'll just take it over. I've
yeah,
heard,
and that's really what we're right now. Those are the conversations that are happening in Congress at kind of early on, right? We're not going to pass legalization in the next year or two. It's not going to happen, but in the next 5 years, I think we may. And it's really important that members of Congress understand this. Many of them are understanding this concern, in that if for example, one thing we oppose is rescheduling. That
you got to get it off of Schedule 1.
yeah,
I mean,
getting it down to Schedule 2 or 3 would arguably could almost be worse, because it would open the door for pharma and nobody else. So
yeah, I see what you're saying.
and I think I'm hopeful that there's been enough progress in the states ahead of the federal government that the odds of that, every day that goes by and every state that comes online with a new law, the odds of just a rescheduling as an attempted fix become lower and lower. It's still a concern, but we make sure that, I think, certainly certainly on the Democratic side of the aisle, I think there's a really pretty deep understanding by now that rescheduling isn't the answer, and that it won't fix the state federal conflict. And that's what is a big concern, is all of these states have already implemented these laws, created these industries. They're dependent on the stream of tax revenue from these industries that they've created, and doing rescheduling would not only not resolve the conflict with federal law, will present additional conflicts, in fact.
So what do you think is a good way to, I mean, what is the best possible outcome for the medium? What do you think is what should be done with the scheduling?
So yeah, well, we think it should be removed from the list of the scheduling altogether.
Mhm.
And cannabis should be regulated. Various cannabis products should be regulated appropriately. We have a white paper we put out. We recommend 4 kind of federal regulatory lanes.
Mhm.
One of them would be pharmaceutical products created by and that go through the FDA trials like any other pharmaceutical.
Mhm.
And that's one, and that's perfectly fine, like Epidiolex and that sort of path. And then you would have psychoactive cannabinoids, which I think, which would be, your edible products, your flower, your vape products that are found in dispensaries. Those should be treated more comparably to alcohol. And we recommend that be regulated by the TTB, which is the Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau at the federal level. And then you have products like cosmetics and topicals and
Right.
non-psychoactive consumables, and those should be regulated by the FDA, but in a manner, more like kind of a nutraceuticals or cosmetics in the case of those.
So tell me a little bit more about your PAC.
So we have a political action committee, the
Mhm.
NCIA PAC. The PAC
Mhm.
supports candidates for federal office that support the industry. And so it's, I think this is the number one thing that the industry really needs to understand, is that we can't just sit on the sidelines and expect good things to happen in Congress, because it takes a lot to get anything to move in Congress, period. And we've seen that. I mean, look how hard it is to get infrastructure passed, or bills that you would think, or the, the debt ceiling and all these things that have nothing to do with cannabis that you would think would be a no-brainer. It's hard to get anything done, and it takes a lot of resources and a lot of effort, and it takes having political influence and ensuring that our friends are getting elected and reelected to Congress, friends of this industry. So the PAC does just that. We anyone who's a member of NCIA can donate to the PAC, and then those donations get passed along to members of Congress and staff or I'm sorry, not staff, but members of Congress and candidates for Congress that are supportive of our issues.
So,
so, I think one thing I think that's just one component. Another thing people need to do is understand that they should be contributing directly to candidates that support the industry. They should be showing up to events, making their voice heard. Of course, be a member of the association, but there's so many other things that industry leaders need to be doing if they're truly going to, be invested in this industry. And every other industry does it. And it's kind of, sometimes it's baffling to me. It seems like this industry is less politically involved than most, even though we have the most to lose and the most on the line. This industry, by the way, is illegal still.
Yeah. I mean, what is the temperature among the politicians? Are there champions? Are there champions for this?
Yeah, I mean,
cannabis, and who are they?
Yeah, I mean, there's a growing list of champions. I mean, we've got, some of them been, somebody like Congressman Blumenauer from Oregon has been carrying this issue for decades, and he's probably, he's one of the biggest champions on the Democratic side, along with California's Barbara Lee. Many of the Democrats have really kind of also moved into the champion category in recent years. On the Senate side, you have, Cory Booker. You have, but Chuck Schumer, who's the Senate Majority Leader himself, introduced a really comprehensive cannabis reform bill last year. So I would consider him to be even a champion at this point. On the Republican side, there aren't as many, but this still is a bipartisan issue in that we have far fewer opponents on the Republican side, and we also have champions like Nancy Mace, who's moving who's advocated for another legalization bill in the House. Congresswoman Mace, and Congressman Joyce, and from Ohio, who's really been pushing on the banking issue. So it really spans both sides. But one thing I've noticed, more over the years is the opposite. Not only have we seen more champions, the opposition has really quieted down in that there's still people, there's still folks in Congress that are going to come out and vote no on anything cannabis related, but they're doing it very quietly. It used to be, they'd be lining up to give speeches on the House floor about how, marijuana is going to destroy our country and our youth, and the sky's going to fall. And you just don't hear that anymore. You almost don't hear any word from the opposition because it's so far out of step with the voters, including Republican voters who, majority of Republicans support legalization. So that to me is really showing where the tipping point is.
We're getting to that tipping point, right? At some point, like you said, within the next X number of years. So I guess in closing, my question would be that in light of the fact that this is coming, what do you think is the best way to protect the lively creativity and sustainability of the small to medium-sized cannabis entrepreneurs in the face of all of this that's coming?
I think, it goes back to having a seat at the table, engaging. I think that, right now, if you look at who's lobbying on federal legalization, it's us, NCIA, which represents hundreds of small businesses. It's Cresco, it's GTI, and it's a couple of the very large companies that are also pushing for this. So for the small businesses to sit back and think Cresco or GTI and Columbia Care and these large multi-state operators are going to have their best interests in mind would be a big mistake. It's really going to be important that small businesses continue to not only be part of the association, but to engage politically, to make their voice heard in not just at the federal level, but the state, local level, because otherwise this will be they will be railroaded over in favor of larger companies who have this is America, and they have a right to also advocate for themselves politically, but they have a different agenda. They're going to be pushing a more protectionist agenda to keep the industry consolidated. And we want to see a vibrant industry that's open to any responsible entrepreneur who has the skill set to succeed in this industry, should be able to succeed in this industry.
Well, I mean, there is such a liveliness and creativity in this field. It's really amazing. And I think that the work that you've been doing and NCIA. So I want to thank you, Aaron Smith, the co-founder and chief executive officer of the National Cannabis Industry Association, for joining us here at Head Magazine. Really appreciate it. Continue the very fine work that you're doing.
Thank you very much.